Saw dudes, while the Oberon Prime rework build is cooking, I wanted to release a follow-up level cap test for Protea. A couple of viewers were asking about Protea's use of augments in level cap, which makes sense seeing as I recommended their use in Steel Path content. So, for this test, much of the loadout stays the same, but Protea's build is slightly augmented. Just skipping to the end now, the augments are great for level cap, but they have trade-offs compared to the other setup. That being said, it is extremely strong, and its use is dependent on one's preferences. That's enough yapping, let's get started. The build shown on screen was not featured in the dedicated build guide, but it is an offshoot of one of the builds. More options will be discussed later on. For this setup, I use Nourish over Dispensary at the recommendation of one of my viewers. Thank you STXT. Just like the last build, the aura was growing power for the ability strength increase. Prime Sure-Footed prevented knockdowns from enemies, but not knockdowns from Temporal Anchor's Deathgate. Prime Continuity, Prime Flow, Blind Rage, and Archon Stretch all remain from the last build and are integral to increasing the base values of Protea's abilities. Umbral Intensify marks the first change on the build, but I will return to this in a moment. Equilibrium is mandatory on this setup. We no longer have Dispensary to handle the heavy lifting of the energy economy. Temporal Artillery is the first augment on the build. It is an augment mod for Protea's Blaze Artillery that causes a single artillery to follow Protea with its duration pause while Temporal Anchor is active, but it does receive a cap of 20 times to its maximum combo count. The mod also removes the 130-degree frontal cone to the artillery turret that is following Protea, allowing it to target all enemies within range. Temporal Erosion is the second augment mod on the build and causes Shrapnel Vortex and Blaze Artillery to remove armor while Temporal Anchor is active. The armor strip scales with ability strength, making it incredibly synergistic with Temporal Artillery and Blaze Artillery. Back to Umbral Intensify. This mod increases Protea's ability strength on top of Blind Rage and replaces Overextended. Because Temporal Artillery removes the firing cone restriction on the turret following Protea, range is not such a sticking point. However, a great alternative to Umbral Intensify is Archon Vitality, since it doubles the heat procs from Blaze Artillery. As already mentioned, Nourish is the helmet ability I chose to use over Dispensary. Nourish fixes much of the energy issues that this build experiences and makes the heat procs hit harder. Viral application is essential to melting enemies in level cap, and having this ability makes it much easier to do so. The arcane combo I used is still Multificiency and Arcane Steadfast. Multificiency helps increase the duration of Grenade Fan, Nourish, and Temporal Anchor, which reduces the amount of recasting needed, thereby reducing energy expenditure. Arcane Steadfast reduces energy expenditure by granting a chance to have the next 3 ability casts to not cost energy after an initial ability cast. This arcane allows for much better spamability and plays well into the spell casting nature of Protea. Just like in the dedicated build guide, I use 1 Tauforge Amber Shard for casting speed and 4 Tauforge Crimson Shards for ability duration. The casting speed is mandatory on Protea since she spams abilities, and because the animations themselves are a window for enemies to kill you. The Crimson Shards makes it easier to run around with the Temporal Artillery turret. Time to cover the Parazon. It is the exact same as last time. Power Drain increases ability strength of the next ability cast by 50% upon executing a Mercy Kill. Out of Sight provides some safety, blinding enemies within an 18-meter radius upon performing a Mercy Kill. Blood for Life grants a 100% chance to drop a health orb on a Mercy Kill, which plays well with Equilibrium on the build. Blood for Energy is another great alternative if you don't have Blood for Life. The weapons for the loadout are the same as last time, but only Epitaph Prime has a couple of changes. I did this to make the build a good analog for comparison to the last video. Just like the last video, Coda Bassocyst was my primary weapon and came with an electricity valence bonus. The alternate fire for the Coda Bassocyst has forced impact and magnetic procs, making quick work of shields and overguard, which was a major nuisance in higher levels. The build is solid for killing Thrax and didn't struggle with multiple units. While I did use an Epitaph Prime again, the whole build has been changed thanks to the suggestion from Jarlo1147. Thank you for that. The build focuses on being a heat inherent primer, which increases the dot damage from Blaze Artillery. To simplify the mechanic, heat proc scale off of the first multipliers from the first application of heat. By using a high heat weight and correct Bane mod, subsequent procs of heat will deal significantly more damage. Of course, this means using the primed version of Expel Grineer, but I don't have that. Please use that on your build. Okina Prime Incarnon was the same weapon I used in the last run, and it's the weapon that was released with Protea Prime. The evolutions I used were Seeing Red, Swordsman's Celerity, and Survivor's Edge. The main build itself is fairly standard, focusing on a hybrid approach. This weapon was my backup in case I ran out of ammo from Coda Bassocyst, or if I just needed to clear a horde of mobs. Nautilus made an appearance once again. Cordon groups enemies within 30 meters every 15 seconds, letting Blaze Artillery hit multiple targets for more damage. Assault mode makes Nautilus attack and prime enemies, while Coolantly slows nearby foes with cold procs. Mystic Bond gives Protea a free cast for every 5 abilities Nautilus uses. Calculated Redirection boosts shields to maintain Reinforced Bond to fire rate buff. Manifold Bond lets Nautilus spam Cordon more when enemies die with multiple status effects. Scent Deconstruct adds a 25% chance for injured enemies to drop health orbs, synergizing with Equilibrium. Vacuum and Regen round out the setup for quality of life. The weapon I chose to use on Nautilus Prime is the Helstrum. I use it as a viral primer since it has an exceptional status chance. The build on screen is a pretty solid baseline minus the unranked Vigilante Armaments mod. I just didn't want to sink in another forma, but you probably should. Madurai is the focus school I used because it's what you should be using for Level Cap Void Cascade. Void Strike and Void Fuel are backups in case I go into Last Stand with my operator. Phoenix Talons was only really good for Okina Prime Incarnon because Coda Bassocyst primarily deals elemental damage. Sling Strength was good for increasing the energy multiplier from Nourish. The amp I used was the standard 147, also known as the Certus Brace, Raplac Prism, and Fad Scaffold. This is the amp I always use, and I highly recommend you try it out for level cap runs. I use Magus Cloud, Magus Lockdown, Eternal Eradicate, and Eternal Onslaught as my operator arcanes. Time to talk about the run. As usual, I will start with the bad, then move to the good. The first issue I ran into was with Temporal Anchor itself. The ability feels clunky to use, and it took several test runs in Bastille Path Survival before I felt confident with it. If you forget to deactivate Temporal Anchor before the timer expires, you'll teleport right back to your original casting point. This can easily waste time and drop all of your stored damage. Sometimes it even sends you to an area with no exilizers, completely throwing off your rotation times. You really have to stay aware of that timer, because a single mistake can put you in a bad position fast. The next issue was energy economy, which was easily one of the biggest struggles during the run. Without Nourish, Equilibrium, and Arcane Steadfast, Protea would be bottoming out on energy almost constantly. Every part of her kit demands energy: Shrapnel Vortex, Shield Satellites, Nourish, and Temporal Anchor. With Blind Rage in the mix, the drain becomes intense. Failing to trigger Steadfast at the right time can leave you dry within seconds. And once you run out of energy, the loop falls apart, and Protea becomes much harder to play effectively. To make matters worse, when you're focused on maintaining all of those abilities, it's easy to lose track of where energy orbs are spawning. Dispensary is no longer providing energy orbs or health orbs, so things can snowball quickly. You'll spend more time recovering than progressing through rotations, which hurts efficiency and rhythm. The last issue I noticed was with Temporal Artillery. The new functionality, where a turret follows Protea, is great, but the 20 times damage multiplier cap feels limiting. With Umbral Intensify, that's about 24,300 heat damage per hit, which sounds fine on paper. However, at level cap, that's not enough to keep up without outside buffs. Most of the damage comes from the heat procs rather than the direct shots, and that's pretty okay. A small increase to a 25 times multiplier would make it a lot more impactful, but as it stands, it's just a little underwhelming. Now let's move on to the good news, because when this build works, it feels fantastic. The first big improvement is the removal of the Blaze Artillery firing arc. This change alone completely transforms how Protea plays. Having a turret that follows you and automatically covers your blind spots is a massive improvement for both damage output and survivability. The forced heat procs keeps enemies panicking and unable to shoot back, while Temporal Erosion strips armor as you move through groups. It keeps Protea mobile, aggressive, and constantly dealing damage without needing to stop and micromanage turret placement. The next highlight is survivability. Once you get into steady rhythm, Protea becomes surprisingly durable. Shield Satellites continue to provide strong protection, and Shrapnel Vortex adds stagger and armor reduction when Temporal Anchor is active. Nourish brings viral procs and stagger effects, while Temporal Anchor itself acts as a safety net. Even if things go wrong, the ability to rewind after taking lethal damage makes it very difficult to die outright. Once the loop is established, Protea feels nearly invincible, even in chaotic situations. Survivability on this build is arguably a bit better than the last if you get used to the loop. In the whole run, I didn't need to get revived once. The best part of the build is that it still plays extremely well into the DPS support role. Protea still provides shield satellites, AoE damage coverage, and defense stripping in a mobile package. It's hard to compete with a Warframe that can do all of these things well while supporting a team, and I firmly believe that her kit made the run super smooth. One small change I would consider utilizing, if you feel up to it, is swapping Umbral Intensify for Archon Vitality for the heat proc multiplier. I would also swap out Nourish for Roar for the double dipping effect on the heat proc damage. This eliminates the need to use a heat inherit primer for the most part, while also opening up the secondary weapon to the Grimoire. Using the Grimoire can allow for energy regeneration through the Zada Invocation mod. While Nourish may not be on the build anymore, the energy regen provided by other sources can make up for it. Now, I have already established that Protea Prime is a Warframe worth picking up for level cap content. So the question isn't, is Protea worth it? Rather, it is, which build is better? I can't answer that definitively because it is based on playstyle, and not just raw damage. If you like a very simple run-and-gun loadout without the clunky nature of Temporal Anchor, I would use the first setup with Roar. It is super strong and gets the job done, but offloads strength to weapons, meaning those choices matter a lot. Today's build is a bit more involved on the loadout side, but it makes for a wonderful experience. Survivability is great, and the utility provided leaves a lot of room for player expression. Additionally, there is no shortage of damage, and the gameplay shown in this footage is just the tip of the iceberg. If I had to choose though, I would choose today's build and continue to improve on it with complementary weapons. It was incredibly fun and flexible, and if you watch my videos, you know I love that the most. Long story short, Protea is Poggies. I hope this level cap video helped. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you all for watching and happy farming. Stay safe.